Hi, everybody. This is Daniel Stiller from Better Rhodes, and I am meeting here today with Keith Villa of Ceria. We're going to talk a little bit about the beer, about his amazing history and path into brewing, and then just kind of explore what we think is what we see as the future of beer and the alcohol-free market. So, with no further ado, I want to turn it over to Keith to say hi.
Well, hi, Dan. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's my pleasure to join you and just tell a few stories about the journey as to how Ceria came about and what we're planning now and in the future.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there because I've struggled with the pronunciation of the name, and it is Ceria. But I'd love to know a little bit about the history of that. Where did you come up with that name?
Well, when my wife and I started the company back at the very end of 2017, we thought of a few names for the company, and we did a quick trademark search, and we found that all the cool names were taken. It's literally with 7,000 breweries in the United States. All the names that are beery or fun were literally taken, and so we looked at each other and we said, maybe we should just make up a name, and then we thought and we said, well, why don't we name it after two things? Number one, the Roman goddess of agriculture is Ceres. She's where we get the name cereal from. Cereal, and she was the one that was believed by the Romans to be responsible for great harvests and the successful growing of crops. And she was also the statue that adorned the campus in Belgium where I got my PhD in brewing. The campus over there, right in Brussels, it's called the Ceria campus. It's a French-speaking campus, and Ceria it's a French acronym that stands for the Center for Teaching and Research in the Food Industries. And on that campus, they had a brewing school, a chocolate making school, a culinary school, even a hotel and restaurant management school. And so the name really resonated with my wife and I, and we thought, it's a little difficult to pronounce, but that's where the story comes from on the name of our beer in our brewery.
Well, I think it's a great story, and just for those who are paying attention, this is actually Dr. Villa, but we're not going to stand on, and Keith doesn't stand on titles, so we're just going to refer to him as Keith today. But a PhD from school in brewing in Belgium, the center of the brewing center of the world for all intents and purposes. That's incredible. And then that journey took you to Coors, and I want to bring up the fact that you created what for a lot of people was their very first introduction to craft beer, which was Blue Moon.
Yeah, in 1994, I convinced the folks at Coors, which eventually became Molson Coors. I convinced them to give me funding to start this craft brewery because we had done some research showing that craft beer was really starting to take off, or so we thought. And of course, I had just come back from Belgium getting my PhD in brewing, so I was really familiar with specialty beers and the way that the Belgians were able to make such fantastic, delicious beers. And so, and by the way, in Belgium, they also taught you how to make great tasting non-alcoholic beers. So that was a huge plus, which I used for Ceria after I retired from Molson Coors. But I convinced them to to fund me. What they did is they said, yes, but you cannot do this in Golden, Colorado. So I had to find a brewery that had capacity. And back in those days, there was one in upstate New York that had capacity. So that's where I brewed Blue Moon from 1995 to 1997. And during that time, a lot of people don't realize it was really difficult for me to launch Blue Moon because the senior leaders at Coors back then, they really didn't care for the taste of Blue Moon because it was very, very different. Back in 1995, when I launched, the number one style of craft beer was amber ales, and George Killian's Irish Red was the number one selling craft beer, and so it was. Craft beer did not look like what it does today, and so it was very different. And launching a Belgian style white ale was very, very strange for a lot of people. So, but I did.
But it definitely, yeah, it did it, and it changed the way, like you said, it changed our association with beer, and it really opened up the market. But then, so you retired, and you decided to not continue on that path, but to create a alcohol-free product.
Right.
And so I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay, so yeah, I retired because I
At a very young age, all right.
yeah, well, I was able to retire because of the success of Blue Moon, and so I retired, and at that point, my wife and I looked at the market, and what we decided was that there was an opportunity with cannabis, and we thought, what better way to get into the cannabis market than to offer a product that was socially acceptable to people that had cannabis, because back then, and today, the major form of cannabis consumption really is the smokable form, whether it's pre-rolls, joints, vape pens, all those smokable items. And we thought, let's bring a socially acceptable format to the world of cannabis. And edibles are nice, but they're not as social because you can't sit around and eat gummies all night and talk to people, or you can't eat chocolates, but you can socialize over a beverage, a cannabis beverage. And to me, the part about socializing is really, really critical, because all of us as human beings, we socialize. We want to talk to each other and just have fun, and you can't go to your friend's wedding or your relative's wedding and toast with a gummy. You have to toast with a glass of liquid.
Well, it's the celebration, it's the community, it's all those aspects, and that's one of the things we often talk about is the what by saying I don't want to have alcohol, we don't want to also say I don't want to have community, I don't want to have celebration. So creating great products in this space is really what we at Better Rhodes are trying to celebrate, and obviously what you brought to the table with Ceria as well.
Yeah, and so I got to work creating recipes for non-alcoholic beers, and I learned a lot of that in Belgium. And so I got recipes. We were able to find a good co-packer. We put everything together and were able to infuse the beers. We launched with a Belgian white, non-alcoholic, and it still has 5 milligrams of THC. And then we introduced an IPA that has 10 milligrams of THC plus 10 milligrams of CBD. And what we found out right away was that people loved the taste of the non-alcoholic beer. And we heard from a lot of our customers, well, we thought they were customers, but these were people like first responders, truck drivers, military, people who get tested for drugs. And they said, I love the taste of your non-alcoholic beer, but I get tested and I don't want to risk my career, for a beer that has cannabis. And they asked if we could provide it in a non-infused form. So that was really the spark that told us, we got to pivot and start offering our beers without the infusion. And so we did that. We spent 2019 creating the labels and everything for the NA market, and we launched in February of 2020. And we found out right away that people love our non-alcoholic beers, which they're labeled as NA, meaning less than 0.5% ABV, but in fact they are 0.0, so they're alcohol free. So sometime in the future we'll change the labeling to 0.0 alcohol free.
So, and what's preventing you from doing that now? Is that that's registered as 0.0 as opposed to, because just I'm saying on our site we wouldn't register, or we wouldn't search you as a 0.0. It would be a less than 0.5.
Right. We're in both of those. We are less than 0.5, but we are 0.0. The only the only thing that's stopping us right now, there are two things. Number one, what we're finding is the general market, the typical consumer of NA products really doesn't yet understand the difference between alcohol-free and non-alcoholic. Because here in the United States, the government actually has classifications. So at 0.0, you do have to be 0.0 to call it alcohol-free. Otherwise, if there's a trace of alcohol, anywhere from 0.1 up to 0.49, you have to call it non-alcoholic. Right? And then from 0.5 to 2, it can be called a low alcohol beer. But anything above 0.5 is called beer. But below 0.5, there are all these classifications. And so it's complex even for a brewer to understand all this. But consumers are having a little bit of a tough time, figuring out what is alcohol-free, what does it truly mean? And we'll get there. We'll educate everybody so that they truly understand what that means.
Yeah, and Keith, that's one of our challenges as well at Better Rhodes is, we've talked about this before, that there's a lot of people coming into this segment and being introduced to all this choice that's out there. But we also have this important role to play as educators and informing people on, the rules, the regulations, but also what the products and what products 0.5, what's 0.0, what's alcohol-free, what's non-alcoholic. And we're getting a lot of questions around that. And that's, I think part of this process, part of the Meet the Makers, is giving you the opportunity to tell your story, but also to educate the people on our site, because we're all learning. And but what we also see is there's just so much growth here, so much excitement around the segment that people continue to come back, and ideally we're going to continue to teach them new things about what's going on in the industry. And which kind of leads me to my next question is, what do you see, what's next? I know you have two great products, and I'm not asking you to show us what's up your sleeve, but just in general, where do you see the growth in the industry, or what's new and exciting in the industry?
Well, in order to look forward, I think we have to look back. And when we look back, at least in the United States, non-alcoholic beer for the longest time was available, but it was more or less a play by the big brewers at corporate responsibility, rather than offering consumers something that was delicious that they could enjoy and socialize over. And so with that background, right now what we're seeing is a literal explosion of craft brewers making non-alcoholic beers that are actually flavorful and delicious. So in the future, I see just kind of a general trend of a continuing focus on health and well-being. I think people are much more interested in taking care of themselves. The days of people going out on a weekend and just over-consuming alcohol, those I think are limited, because people realize that that's not good for your health in the long run. Binge drinking is dangerous. There are studies after studies showing that people who over-consume alcohol eventually have serious health problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think that health and wellness factor is going to play really heavily on the future of NA beers. And so with that in mind, I think we're going to continue to see the rise of NA beers. We're going to see flavors. Here at Ceria, we're always playing around with new styles, and we can do practically any style. I have a PhD in brewing, so I know how to make pretty much every style of beer out there. And I've been a beer judge since 1993, traveling as far as Japan to judge beer competitions. And so I know a lot about the tasting of beers, the technical tasting. And here we can do almost anything in regards to beer. But in the future, I do feel that health and wellness is going to be a big issue. And I think that's going to really help to be the tailwind on this whole industry of non-alcoholic beer. And I
Well,
think,
yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that was. Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, and we saw. And I'm going to draw a parallel from my previous life, which was in the electric vehicle industry, where the first electric vehicles were, like you said, a conscience play by the major manufacturers. Is almost a punishment when you look at the EV1 and the Ford Think project and things like that. And then all Tesla comes along and just creates a great car that happens to be electric, and and has all these additional benefits, and people are being more mindful about what they're driving. And I see the same thing. Like we at Better Roads, we don't talk about abstinence as much as empowerment, and that is like, let's give you great choices, great products to enjoy the ritual, enjoy the celebration, enjoy the community that comes along with drinking, just without the alcohol. And recently, the Globe and Mail in Toronto, it's a great paper, a national paper, did an article, and it said that alcohol is the new smoking, is basically this younger generation smoking, and in that this perception of alcohol is changing. And I remember when I first started my career at Ford Motor Company. I remember going into my manager's office, and he had an ashtray on his desk, and he was smoking. And then that stopped, and then they just had this inside the building, this glass cube where people went and smoked. And then all of a sudden it was gone, and then no one was smoking. And if you smoked, you had to smoke outside, and it just, we just pushed it further away, and our vision and perception of what smoking was changed. At one time, smoking was considered a health benefit. It was prescribed. That seems crazy now, and I imagine, like you said, I imagine we'll continue to see this push towards kind of mindfulness and well-being, and alcohol just is going to have a smaller and smaller role. And I'm not saying abstinence completely, but this idea of binging and that the focus on it, and that in order to have fun, in order to celebrate, it must be. I think that's changing, and I think that's a really good thing. I think for both of us, because we're just both invested.
oh
In
yeah,
it right now.
and it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle choice. It's not a something that's forced on us, and people choose it for different reasons. Some choose it for the health and wellness benefits. Others continue to minimize their alcohol intake, and they just want to pace themselves so that they can
Yeah.
be up all night, and if they want, and party, but do it responsibly. And some people might be on medications that limit the amount of alcohol
Yeah.
that they can consume, and others have religions that don't permit alcohol. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons out there, and more or less, it really is a lifestyle choice. It's not something to be ashamed of at all. I think as we move forward, more and more people are going to choose that lifestyle.
And I think that's one of the things we talk about, is we want the conversation to be about what you're drinking, not why aren't you drinking. And that's where, and we're already seeing that change happen. But before, you had to justify why you chose not to drink, and now I think it's just becoming a much more accepted position. And again, we're nascent, and I think we'll see that continue to grow, and that's exciting. And what's also super exciting is seeing all this innovation happening, and in many ways, the innovation's taking place because they aren't beholden to traditional methods. They aren't, we see that, well, I guess in beer with the Reinheitsgebot in Germany, how that limited innovation, and people would argue. And so now we're seeing, if we can kind of go beyond these traditional methods, we can see a ton of innovation. We'll see that with the spirits and things that are even hard to classify because we can't draw parallels to them to traditional alcohol. So that, to me, is what's really exciting. All these crafts and craft breweries and craft producers and innovation. And I think we're going to continue to see some really exciting things in this.
I agree 100%, and those innovation moves really will move this industry forward. One of the things to keep in mind too is that I see a bright opportunity in doing food pairings with NA beers, because they're so flavorful now that they really do go well with different types of foods. And in the past, people would say, oh, we need wine with food or something. And it's like, no, you don't, because you can certainly find non-alcoholic beers and non-alcoholic wines and spirits that go really well with food. And so I think the ability to pair our beers with food, for example, our Grain Wave is a Belgian style white ale that happens to not have alcohol. It goes very well with seafood, white meats. It just really pairs nicely with those because of that citrusy tartness about it. And our IPA, that goes well with heavier dishes, beef dishes, even things like a hamburger if you want. So I think food pairing is going to be really important in the future because, again, as social creatures, we long to be with each other and enjoy a dinner or an event. And what better event than to have a great meal with a friend or a relative over a non-alcoholic beverage?
Absolutely. One of a beer is great, but a beer with your bro is better. So
Yeah.
And I'll have to mention that to our resident chef Amy Barnes, who's been creating some recipes for us in pairing foods and some of our products together. So I'll make sure she watches this. Keith, thank you so much for spending all this time with us.
Oh, Dan, it's been my pleasure, and thank you for putting this together. I think the industry owes you a tall glass of non-alcoholic beer.
I look forward to it. Keith, thank you very much. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Cheers.